You were never supposed to hear this. In the year 1841, deep in the woods outside Crowhaven, there stood a stone funeral home, quiet, respectable, and reeking of rot. Behind its whitewashed walls, a family carved their legacy not from grief, but from murder. They did not wait for death to knock. They welcomed it in, and then they learned to create it. The Vaughn family were undertakers by trade, pillars of their rural community, but beneath their chapel's floorboards, they kept more than coffins. They kept secrets, dark ones, bloody ones, the kind that stained not just your hands but your soul. And for nearly 20 years, not a single person suspected what they truly were. Until one bitter autumn night, when a stranger arrived and refused to leave. If you're ready to open a door that most men would rather seal shut forever, make sure you're subscribed to DeadScroll. Hit that bell. What you're about to hear is not folklore. It's a history buried alive. The Vaughns ran the Crowhaven Mortuary, a tall, narrow building framed by iron gates and whispering willows. From the outside, it resembled any modest family-run operation. But the moment you stepped inside, you felt it, the heaviness like something watching. Locals brushed it off. They said it was just the grief in the air. But those who spent time there too long began to feel changed, as if the place itself could see inside them. What made the Vaughns powerful was not just their control of the dead. It was their mastery over the perception of the living. Eliza Vaughn, the matriarch, was a midwife turned mortician. She had delivered hundreds of babies. But behind her lace gloves and tea service, she kept jars of ash and teeth. Abraham Vaughn, the patriarch, rarely spoke in public, but in the basement, he whispered to the corpses. Their children, Thomas and Mary Ann, were polite, charming, and they were always present when someone in town grew ill. For 2 decades, no one asked questions, because grief blinds you, because kindness can be a mask. But then, 17 people died in 3 months, and all of them, every last one, had been prepared for burial by the Vaughns. Coincidence? Or something else entirely? Welcome to the descent. By the time the frost settled on the gravestones that winter of 1841, Crowhaven had become a town of shadows. The Vaughns maintained their place at the center of it all, polite smiles, quiet prayers, and unwavering service to the grieving. But beneath the pressed black suits and polished caskets, something ancient stirred. This wasn't just murder. It was ritual, calculated, practiced, and perfected over years of trust and silence. Crowhaven wasn't a town with secrets. It was a town built on one. Eliza Vaughn had always been the first to arrive when someone took ill. She offered herbal remedies, broths, balms. She'd stroke the forehead of the sick and whisper something beneath her breath. Old words, words not spoken in Crowhaven's churches. And often, within days, the person was gone. No one thought it strange. People died. It was 1841. Life was hard. Death was natural. But the Vaughns, they made death feel expected. What the townspeople didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the Vaughns had records. Meticulous records. Kept in a locked drawer behind the embalming table. Written in iron gall ink and bound in flesh-colored leather. A death ledger. With columns for names, symptoms, time of death, and methods. Every kill was a study. Every corpse, a data point. And it wasn't just for the bodies. The ledger noted the reactions of the bereaved. How easily they were consoled. Whether they asked questions. Whether they suspected. The Vaughns weren't just undertakers. They were psychological architects, testing how much horror a town could absorb without breaking. And it worked. Because fear is most effective when it's invisible. The turning point came on November 6th, 1841. That was the night the stranger arrived, a young surveyor from Boston named Elias Gray. He was hired by the state to map the outer edges of Crowhaven's forest for a proposed rail line. A routine job, but Elias didn't trust easily. He noticed things. How quickly townsfolk died. How few families had more than one generation left. How the Vaughns never seemed to age. When Elias passed the funeral home that night, he swore he heard music coming from the basement. Not a hymn, not a lullaby, something older, a melody with no words. The kind you don't hum, but remember anyway. That was the first time someone watched them. And that's when the Vaughns made their first real mistake. Elias Gray was a man of logic, trained in topography and mathematics. Not myths, not murder. But the deeper he moved into Crowhaven, the less sense things made. Streets were misaligned. Buildings shifted subtly on his maps. Graves appeared in places not marked on town records. Time seemed elastic, stretched, and thinned like skin left too long in the sun. And at the center of every discrepancy stood one constant: the Vaughns. He began keeping notes, not just about the land, but the people. He tracked patterns: births that never became lives, deaths that arrived too soon, widows who never remarried, men who vanished without even the dignity of a grave. And always, the funeral home, the final destination, the gate between silence and dirt. Elias first met Eliza Vaughn the morning after a burial. She stood alone in the cemetery behind the mortuary, hands clasped, lips moving silently. She turned before he could announce himself. Her smile was precise, like it had been practiced in a mirror. "You're the map maker," she said, though he had never introduced himself. "Tell me, do you map what lies above or what lies beneath?" That question, and the way her eyes held his, stayed with Elias long after she disappeared into the morning fog. That night, he returned to the burial ground, this time with his own tools: a compass, lantern, and folded parchment. But the compass spun uselessly. The lantern flickered, though there was no wind. And under the light of a thinning moon, he found something he couldn't explain: a narrow door set into the earth behind a veil of briars. The kind of door no funeral home was supposed to have. A root cellar, perhaps, or something older, much older. He didn't open it. Not yet. But he marked on his map with a single symbol, a triangle with one eye. The same symbol he'd seen carved into the Vaughns' gravestones, etched subtly, as if meant to be overlooked. Elias Gray had uncovered the first scar in Crowhaven's skin. But he didn't know yet how deep the infection ran. What he did next. What any man would do when he senses something sacred has been defiled. He returned to the town hall to request death records. And that's when he found the ledgers had been altered. Dates crossed out. Names rewritten. And an entire decade missing. The decade missing from the death records wasn't some clerical oversight. It was a deliberate excision. A surgical cut through the town's memory. 1831 to 1841. 10 years erased from official history. Elias Gray ran his fingers over the fragile, scorched edges of the record book. Someone had burned the original pages and replaced them with forgeries, but poorly. The ink was newer. The handwriting didn't match. The entries were too clean. No outbreaks. No mass deaths. No tragedies. According to the town's official archive, nothing of note happened in Crowhaven for 10 straight years. But Elias had already mapped 17 graves with those missing dates. He knew what this meant. The Vaughns weren't hiding individual deaths. They were hiding something larger. A massacre, an event, or perhaps something so unspeakable it didn't even have a name. He brought his findings to Sheriff Amos Rourke, a thick-jawed man with eyes like wet granite and hands that stayed too long near his pistol. Elias expected resistance. He didn't expect fear. When he laid out the map, Rourke didn't even glance at it. He just stared in the wall behind Elias and muttered, "Don't dig where the earth doesn't want to be turned." Then he walked away. Elias left the office more convinced than ever. The town was complicit. Or terrified. Or both. That night, he returned to the hidden door behind the mortuary. This time he brought a crowbar. The earth groaned as he pried it open. Beneath the wooden hatch was a narrow stone staircase that descended into a place no map had ever recorded. The air was thick, metallic, and silent. Not quiet, dead silent. The kind of silence that presses against your skin and breathes down your neck. He lit a match. What he saw beneath the Vaughn funeral home shattered any belief he had left in reason. Chains, rows of them, bolted into the stone walls. And tools. Bone saws, hooks, surgical instruments, but older than any hospital would use. Their handles were carved with symbols, the same triangle, the same eye, over and over. But worst of all were the jars. Shelves and shelves of glass jars, each filled with something dark and unidentifiable. Some held fluid, some held fragments. And some, Elias swore, were watching him back. That was the night Elias Gray stopped being a mapmaker. He had crossed into something else. And the Vaughns knew they were waiting for him when he emerged. Not with torches, not with shouts, just presence. The quiet terror of knowing you've been seen by those who don't blink. Eliza Vaughn stood near the gravestones, untouched by moonlight, as if it bent to avoid her. Behind her, two men in black coats and gloves flanked the path. Their faces were familiar, too familiar. Elias realized with a sick twist that he'd seen their portraits in the funeral home. Postmortem portraits. Eliza, he said, voice steadier than he felt. What is that place beneath your home? Her reply was a whisper, but it filled the air like smoke. It's not beneath our home, Mr. Gray. It is our home. The rest is just dressing. The men stepped forward, but she held up a hand. Let him go, she said, eyes locked with Elias's. He needs to see more. Curiosity deserves its punishment. Elias stumbled back into the woods, half running, half blinded by dread. But the Vaughns didn't chase him. They never chased. That was their power. They didn't need to kill. They made the world want to forget you. And they just marked Elias for forgetting. The following days unraveled his life thread by thread. The mayor claimed never to have commissioned him. The innkeeper insisted Elias had checked out a week ago. His maps were missing from the Cartographers Guild. And when he tried to leave Crowhaven, the roads looped, impossible circles through trees that grew closer every hour. Even the sun seemed unsure where to rise. Desperation took hold. Elias began to speak aloud to himself. He drew maps on his skin, in case the paper vanished again. He pinned notes to his coat. The Vaughns are not undertakers. They are custodians. Another, the dead are not resting. They are listening. But the worst came 3 nights later, when he awoke to the sound of something breathing beneath his floorboards. Not rats, not wind. Breathing wet, slow, patient. He tore them up. Beneath the rotted wood was soil, and beneath the soil bone, a latticework of interlocked human bones that stretched for yards, supporting the house like a hidden foundation. Every structure in Crowhaven, Elias now believed, was built on something once human. That's when the voices started. Not from below, from inside his walls. And every voice whispered the same word. Remember. The walls did not just whisper. They chanted, low at first, like the hum of distant machinery, then louder, rhythmic, ancient, and always that single word. Remember. Elias Gray no longer slept. Sleep belonged to men who lived outside the circle. He was inside it now, deep within the Vaughn system. Days blurred, nights bled, meals turned tasteless, faces in town twisted ever so slightly, noses too long, eyes slightly too far apart. The people of Crowhaven, he now saw, were not entirely what they seemed. He began to suspect that they weren't people at all. It wasn't just the bones under the floorboards, or the soundless birds that flew backward at dawn. It was the way time refused to behave. Morning didn't break, it paused. Church bells rang when there was no church. And he kept seeing the same child playing with the same red ball in the same street corner, looping the same laugh like a corrupted memory. Elias finally returned to the mortuary with a torch in hand and sulfur in his coat. He had decided to burn it down. But when he arrived, the building was gone. In its place stood something else, taller, crooked, older, wood twisted like veins. Windows were gone, replaced by circular holes. A sigil hung over the door, carved so deep it bled sap down the blackened walls. The Vaughn funeral home had changed, or it had shed its disguise. He didn't enter. He didn't need to, because the doors opened themselves. And inside, waiting at the bottom of the dark stairwell where chains once hung, stood a figure in gray burial robes. Not Eliza, not one of the gloved men. This one had no face, just smooth, pallid skin stretched tight over bone. And yet somehow, it smiled. Elias didn't move, not because of fear, but because he recognized it. He had drawn that face once, long ago, as a child, in a dream. The faceless figure raised a hand and pointed, not at Elias, at the ground. And Elias understood. This wasn't an invitation to run. It was a command to dig. He dug with his bare hands. The soil beneath the mortuary was colder than winter ice and soft as rot. Each handful unearthed fragments, a tooth, a lock of hair, the torn hem of a mourning dress. Beneath that, glass eyes, dozens, staring up at him from the dark like fish in a drowned well. The faceless figure watched. No motion, no breath, just presence. At last, Elias's finger struck wood. Not a coffin, something far older. A sealed box, wrapped in iron wire, bound with human hair. He hesitated. The hair pulsed slightly, as if reacting to touch. Still he pulled. The wire snapped like a scream, and the lid creaked open. Inside was a journal. His own. The same one he had been writing in since the investigation began. Now stained, brittle, and yellowed with time. But the final pages were impossible. They chronicled events that hadn't yet happened. They spoke of him begging Eliza Vaughn for mercy. They spoke of the townspeople surrounding him with shovels and grins. They spoke of a ritual, and a name he did not recognize, Velmureth. He flipped to the very last page. It was blank, except for a line, written in his own hand. You are not the first. You will not be the last. And underneath that, smaller second line, we only bury the ones who ask too many questions. Behind him, he heard the floorboards above creak. One step, then another. Eliza's voice drifted down, too calm to be human. Now you see, Mr. Gray, there are things that do not wish to be remembered, but it is memory that feeds them. The faceless figure took one step toward him. The air rippled like silk tearing. Do you remember now? Elias tried to speak, to deny, to scream, to pray. But his mouth was full of soil. And suddenly, his arms moved without his permission, shoveling dirt back into the hole. He was burying the box. He was sealing the truth. Because the Vaughns didn't just bury bodies. They buried evidence. And now, Elias Gray had become a gravedigger of his own fate. When Elias woke, he was no longer underground. He was sitting in his own study, back in his townhouse in Ravenshade. The journal, clean and unfinished, sat neatly beside a cup of steaming tea. Rain tapped gently against the windows. No signs of dirt beneath his fingernails. No faceless figure. No mortuary. Just calm. Just silence. But silence has texture. And this one felt too controlled. He rose, opened the journal. Every page was blank. Until the center. There, in jagged ink, were words he hadn't written. He left the door open. His breath caught. He looked toward the front hall. And the door, the one he always locked, stood ajar. He ran to it, slammed it shut, bolted it. But something was already inside. He could feel it moving behind the walls, listening from the attic, crouching in the crawl space beneath the stairs. The Vaughns had let him go, but they had not let him leave. He began to hear the voice again at night. Not Eliza, the other one, the one without a face, whispering through vents, through dreams, through cracks in the glass. Remember what you buried. He tried returning to Crowhaven, tried to find the Vaughn funeral home, but the town didn't exist anymore. The train station clerk laughed when he asked. There's no such place, sir. Hasn't been for nearly 70 years. He showed them photographs. They showed him nothing but fog. Even his case files gone, burned, vanished from police archives. Even his own colleagues claimed to have never heard of the Vaughns. Must have been some other case, they said. They looked at him with concern, like he was sick or cursed. Elias turned to the only thing he had left, the journal. But its pages had changed again. Now it was filled with names. Dozens of them. Dates beside each. Some are already crossed out in red. At the bottom, a new name had been added. His own. And under it, today's date. Halfway through the story, we ask you this. If you're still here, comment the phrase, "Some doors were never meant to open" below. Let us know you're watching. Twice. Because the second half of this tale will show you the cost of remembering what was meant to stay buried. Elias Gray disappeared from Ravenshade the next morning. No note. No body. Just the journal, left open on his desk, marked with one final entry in a different hand. Memory is a graveyard. Dig too deep, and it digs back. But this isn't just about Elias, because others have seen the same faceless figure. A woman in Elmswich claims she dreamed of a man with no face whispering names into her ear for 13 nights straight. On the 14th, she threw herself from a bell tower. A priest in Mournhold confessed to burying 37 sealed boxes beneath the church floorboards before locking himself in the crypt. A child in Brerfin drew pictures of the Von Mortuary before anyone told her existed, and before, officially, it ever had. The names from the journal, they keep appearing. On missing person reports. On gravestones with no birth dates. On lists that vanish from record halls and reappear in handwritten notes on windowsills. And one thing connects them all. Every name was found next to a box. Sealed with iron wire. Bound with human hair. Inside, a memory. A truth. A sin someone tried to erase. And always, somewhere close, a reflection. A mirror. A photograph. A pool of water. Because the faceless figure doesn't just visit. It watches. And if it sees you noticing, if it feels you remembering, it begins to take your face from the world. One photo at a time. One mention at a time. Until even those who love you can't describe your features. You will still exist. But not as yourself. Just a gap in the photo. A blurred silhouette in a crowd. A blank tombstone. And if you're wondering, yes, this is still happening. You're listening to this, and that means you've opened the box too. You've read the name. You've seen the figure. You've remembered what others buried. And now, the journal knows you. Turn your lights down. Look in the nearest mirror. If you can't remember your own reflection for more than 5 seconds, it's already begun. The Vaughn Funeral Home was never registered under any town record. No deed. No tax entries. No blueprints. Not even a mention in the county registry. But buried in the back of failed real estate archive from 1842, researchers later found a page, just one, referring to the building under a different name, the House of Second Silence. According to the document, the house was never meant to be a mortuary. It was designed as an institution of cognitive isolation, a place where memories could be removed, contained, and ritually silenced. It was commissioned by a clandestine order known as the Bellwraith Society, a group of theologians, physicians, and early psychologists who believed certain truths were too corrupting to remain in the public mind. Their method? You weren't cured. You were unwritten. Witnesses, documents, memories, all erased. And when that wasn't enough, you were buried alive, alongside your memories, so that the infection of knowledge couldn't spread. The journal found in Elias's possession included crude maps of the underground tunnels. Some rooms were labeled with phrases like chamber of sifting red memory and the confessional bone. But there was one chamber marked only with a symbol, a circle within a triangle, carved into black ink. Every name in the book had been logged with dates and times, almost like someone was keeping score. One of the investigators who uncovered these documents, Dr. Adrian Locke, was later found in her apartment, with her walls covered in pages from her own academic publications. Every single one had the word "no face" written over her own author photograph. She had cut out her own reflection from every mirror. And in her final recorded note, she whispered, "It doesn't want you to die. It wants you hollow. It wants you remembered by everyone except yourself." You might ask, how can a place like this vanish? But think about it. Every time someone tells you about something horrifying, something unbelievable, you forget the details by morning. Your mind tries to protect you. The Vaughn family didn't just hide bodies. They buried history. And someone or something is making sure it stays that way. What if the Vaughns were never undertakers? What if the coffins, the embalming tools, the cold storage were all misdirection? What if their true purpose wasn't to preserve the dead, but to preserve the forgotten? Buried in the journal was a passage written in what appeared to be a child's hand, shaky, desperate. They put dreams in boxes. I heard them crying when the lid closed. Mama says they were people once. Now, they're just rooms inside someone else's head. Investigators dismissed it as madness. But then came the discovery of Room 8C, a section beneath the mortuary sealed behind a triple-thick concrete wall, never on any blueprint. Inside, nothing but portraits, not hung, not framed, just stacked, thousands of them, every single one painted in oil. Each featured a person with their face either blurred, scratched out, or wiped away, but the background of every canvas showed the same room, the viewing parlor of Vaughn Funeral Home. And None of the subjects were ever identified. Here's what made the hair stand on every investigator's neck. The paint was still wet. Despite tests confirming that some canvases dated back to 1869, the oil hadn't dried. As if the portraits were still becoming. As if the people in them were still being forgotten in real time. No explanation exists for it. None that science can offer, anyway. Elias's journal included sketches of people he'd met, many with distorted faces. But the worst part? Some of those sketches matched modern missing persons cases. People who vanished within the last 5 years. What was Elias seeing? Were these ghosts? Time loops? No, something darker. Some believe the Vaughn Mortuary sits on a cognitive fault line, a place where the fabric between personal identity and collective memory tears. What enters there becomes shared forgetting, the kind you can't escape, even if you never walk through the door. And that's why the town remains silent. Why no one dares talk about the Vaughns? Not because they're scared of death, but because in Vaughn House you don't die. You just slowly stop existing. On August 17th, 1873, the town priest, Father Mercer, received a letter with no return address. The envelope was sealed with a black wax stamp, a symbol matching the one from Elias's journal, a circle inside a triangle. The letter read, "They're not gone. They're unstitched. What you call death is only your inability to hear what still speaks from beneath the stone. The boy has opened something that was never meant to breathe again." Father Mercer never spoke of the letter publicly, but in his private homily notes, archived at the old chapel of Renmore, he wrote a sermon that was never delivered. The title? When God Refuses to Enter a Room. In it he wrote, "There's a house in our town where prayers do not cross thresholds, where memory curdles in the throat, and where the soul folds inward like wet cloth. I fear that the boy is not possessed, but borrowed. He walks with someone else's weight on his bones." That phrase, borrowed, would appear again. This time in the final recorded statement of a nurse who cared for Elias during his brief institutionalization. Her name was Agnes Hartwell. She was assigned to his case for only 3 days. She vanished on the 4th, but her last written entry remains. "He called me by a name no one else knew, not even my own mother. Then he said, 'You're about to be remembered by someone who no longer exists.' I asked him what he meant. He smiled, not like a child, like something older, and he said, 'It's your turn to be borrowed now.'" Authorities dismissed the case as hysteria. But what do you call it when people disappear, but their names remain behind? When the memories of them still exist in photo albums, in census reports, in church rosters, but no one can remember their face, not even their voice, just the weight that something was missing. And Elias? He spoke less and less, not out of fear, but because, as one orderly noted, the boy wasn't speaking to us anymore. He was speaking through us. The line between vessel and voice had been crossed, and no one knew how to turn it back. The hospital closed Elias's case in less than 6 weeks. Too many nurses had left. Too many reports had been misfiled. The head psychiatrist, Dr. Randall Beckett, resigned with a single line in his resignation note. There are some corridors inside a mind that lead too far inward. Elias didn't lose himself. He brought someone else with him. By early October 1873, Elias Renmore was sent home under supervision. But Renmore Manor had changed. Neighbors said the once white walls were now always damp. The windows, which once reflected sunlight, now stayed pitch black, even during the day. His mother, June Renmore, was seen dragging a heavy trunk into the cellar. The trunk was later found open and empty, yet soaked in blood from the inside. No bodies, no evidence, just blood and a single phrase scrawled on the cellar wall in charcoal. He remembers more than one life. From that moment, Elias became nocturnal. He wouldn't eat unless the food was placed in a wooden bowl on the floor. He wouldn't answer to his name unless it was whispered, and then the drawings started again. But these weren't like the old ones. These were blueprints, detailed floor plans of a house that didn't exist in Renmore or anywhere in documented England. A house with 11 identical bedrooms, each numbered not with digits, but symbols that matched ancient alchemical signs. A house with no exits. A house where room 7 was always crossed out, as if it should never be entered. Elias said it wasn't a dream house. It was a memory, one he shared. When asked what would happen if someone tried to find this house, Elias answered, "You already have. It's where you go when you forget your childhood dreams. When a face feels familiar, but you don't know why. When you feel watched while you sleep. It's not haunting, it's returning." Then, on October 29th, just before midnight, Elias vanished. No forced entry, no broken locks, no signs of escape, only the sound of footsteps heard inside the walls. And in the attic? A final sketch. A faceless boy, holding the hand of something tall, black-veiled, and unfinished. Underneath, Elias had written, "I was never alone in my skin." Elias Renmore was declared legally dead in 1876, but the sightings never stopped. The first came from a gravedigger named Charles Morvan, who worked the old cemetery behind St. Agnes Parish. He claimed that while digging a fresh plot, he saw a pale boy standing perfectly still near an unmarked grave. No lantern, no sound, just standing. When Charles approached, the boy whispered, "You dig for bones, but you never ask who's still using them." Then he vanished. Over the years, others reported seeing Elias, or something that looked like him, in abandoned chapels, railway tunnels, and even inside the burnt ruins of the old Renmore Manor. But there was one sighting too disturbing to dismiss. A group of school children exploring the cliffs at Tide Break Point in 1884 found a small door hidden behind thick vines. The door was carved directly into the cliffside, and around it were symbols matching those in Elias's last journal. The children said the door was warm to the touch, and that they heard whispers behind it, not in English but in a language that made their noses bleed. One boy, Matthew Ealdred, put his ear to the wood and collapsed. When he woke up, he spoke a sentence none of the adults could understand. But an elderly professor of comparative linguistics translated it years later. "The mind that warmed me is not yet done." From that point on, Matthew was never the same. He drew incessantly, spoke in riddles, kept repeating a single word under his breath during thunderstorms. Borrowed, the Renmore Cliff door was sealed with bricks by the local vicarage, but within days, the bricks cracked outward. Something had pressed from within. It was clear the phenomenon surrounding Elias wasn't about a boy going mad. It was about a threshold being crossed. An ancient threshold, veiled in the skin of a child. A bridge between minds, between selves, between eras of memory. And those who saw Elias weren't seeing a person. They were seeing a vessel that had never been meant to close. A channel that, once open, began to rot the boundary between identity and invasion. And what came through it was never meant to be named. There is one name, though, that surfaces again and again. It was found etched inside a locked cabinet in the attic of Renmore Manor, burned into the wood backwards, as if scrawled by someone looking through a mirror. Isereth. No origin, no etymology, no known root in any modern or ancient language. But every time that word is spoken aloud in documented records, something strange follows. In 1891, Professor Elgin Morley of the Royal Society tried to recreate Elias's sketches. He believed Isereth was a cipher, a symbolic representation of an ancient cognitive force, perhaps even a collective trauma embedded in the bloodline of certain families. 3 days after announcing his theory, he was found in his study. All the mirrors in his home were shattered, the walls painted in words written in his own blood. Every single phrase ended with Isereth waits in the folds. Another case involved a woman named Dorothea Flint, a former nurse who had briefly worked in Ashfield before Elias was discharged. She came forward in 1896 with a confession. Elias had whispered the word to her in a dream. And then, for 6 months straight, she could not recognize her own reflection. Doctors dismissed it as a dissociative disorder, until the night she murdered her husband, claiming he was a mirror double wearing her real husband's skin. Dorothea's trial transcript was sealed, but a surviving clerk said she would rock at her seat, repeating, "I didn't kill him. I just broke the copy, the one Isereth placed in me." Here's where it deepens. Every recorded mention of Elias Renmore after 1873 contains, at some point, references to duplication, reflection, or loss of self-containment. One chilling note from an unnamed Ashfield orderly reads, "We weren't treating a boy. We were treating a breach." What breach? No one dares to say, but it's implied that Elias was not a victim, nor merely a prodigy. He was a gateway, and when he whispered Isereth into someone's mind, they didn't just hear it. They housed it, because Isereth is not a name. Not really. It's a presence, a returning absence that wears the faces of the forgotten, a shape not yet fully formed, but patiently waiting inside whoever dares remember Elias Renmore. The deeper you look into the Elias Renmore case, the more disturbing the pattern becomes. It wasn't just isolated incidents. Entire families were affected. Generations later, descendants of those who once lived near Renmore Manor began to experience identical symptoms. Hallucinations, lost time, and recurring dreams of a boy with white eyes standing in flooded rooms. One letter from 1913, written by Clara Dent, the granddaughter of a Renmore family servant, contains the line, "He keeps knocking from the inside of my head." She was only 11 when she wrote it. She took her own life a year later. The autopsy noted her brain tissue showed signs of abnormal shrinkage, inconsistent with her age and unexplainable by any known disease at the time. But here's the part that haunts historians and private researchers alike. There were no records of Elias Renmore's birth certificate, no midwife logs, no baptismal records, nothing. It's as if he simply arrived. Doctors believed Elias had knowledge far beyond his years, even beyond the education of scholars twice his age. He would sketch diagrams of machines that didn't exist until decades later. He drew topographical maps of lands never recorded, until explorers confirmed them in the early 1900s. And then there were the symbols, always the same. A circular eye with branches splitting from it, half root, half lightning, found under his bed, carved into window frames, hidden beneath rugs, painted behind wallpaper. One of the symbols, when scanned by a university linguist in 1983, matched the exact vibrational geometry of ancient Mesopotamian seal scripts. But Elias had never been taught Sumerian, Akkadian, or anything remotely similar. The implication was not that Elias learned this, but that he was carrying it from somewhere else. The question that terrifies even the most hardened minds? Was Elias Renmore ever truly human? Or was he something that passed for human, waiting for a world unready to recognize what had arrived in him? By the time local authorities attempted to excavate Renmore Manor's ruins in 1926, the entire basement had collapsed inward. And deep in the soil, excavators found hundreds of clay tablets, none older than 1873, yet inscribed in a language extinct for 4,000 years. Each tablet bore the same phrase, "I remember through others," and stamped at the bottom, Isereth. In the autumn of 1929, a man named Aldrich Hemsworth came forward with something extraordinary. He claimed to be in possession of Elias Renmore's original journal. Not the Ashfield transcriptions, not the redacted versions smuggled through academia, but the true handwritten record, bound in black leather, locked by clasps that bore no keyhole, only a shallow groove that matched the shape of a human finger. Hemsworth said the book had been hidden inside a wall of the collapsed Renmore cellar, wrapped in layers of linen that were completely dry, though the basement had been under groundwater for over 40 years. What he described inside was not a diary, not in any normal sense. It began with drawings, fractured shapes of faces that overlapped, blurred together, eyes in the wrong places. And then came passages written in both mirror script and standard text. One page reads, "I remember when I was not this." Another, "The shape that wore my face before me is near again." And most chilling of all, I did not become Elias. I was assigned Elias. The vessel is compliant. Hemsworth allowed 2 researchers to read the journal. Both were institutionalized within 3 weeks. One stopped speaking entirely. The other, Dr. Rachel Kerrigan, attempted to destroy her own reflection, smashing every mirror in her home before leaping from a second-story window. In her final written note, she scrawled only, "Isereth is not a name. It is the exit, But Hemsworth disappeared before the journal could be archived. The only photo of him, taken in 1930, shows a gaunt, pale man clutching the book close to his chest, his eyes wide, mouth partially open as if caught mid-whisper. And his reflection in the glass, behind him, was smiling. The original photo negative, when examined decades later, revealed a second set of teeth in the reflection, not Hemsworth's. This began the theory of the mirror substitution effect, the idea that Elias Renmore was not a child possessed, but a carrier of a cognitive parasite, one that used reflections, memories, and language itself as its means of replication. Isereth did not need bodies. It needed belief. And the moment you begin to try and understand Elias, you've already opened the door. After the Hemsworth incident, the British Psychological Society issued a rare advisory, not a ban, but a formal warning on the study of non-local personality transference, a field that only existed in fringe corners of parapsychology. And yet, without naming Elias Renmore or the Isereth journals, the advisory included references to cases where individual cognition was found to be externally housed. That phrasing alone sparked a surge of curiosity. Underground circles began circulating copies of the journal's alleged excerpts. Secret forums, occult salons, even academic departments, quietly, started requesting whatever remnants were available from the Renmore excavation. But what they found next tore through the veil of skepticism. In 1934, deep in the archives of a shuttered sanitarium outside Devonshire, a librarian discovered an untouched casebox. Inside, Elias's preserved brain tissue stored in paraffin wax. A Cambridge neurologist by the name of Dr. Everett Marlowe performed a microscopic study. What he discovered shattered conventional neuroscience. Elias's brain had two corpus callosa, that is, two separate bridges between the hemispheres, an anomaly so rare it had only been documented in dolphins and some split-brain patients. But Elias hadn't had a brain injury. He was born this way. Even more disturbing, scans revealed fragments of magnetite, a naturally occurring magnetic mineral, densely clustered in the pineal region of his brain. Not trace amounts, clusters. When tested for resonance, the tissue responded to low-frequency sound in irregular pulses, as if it were reacting like an engine idling in a buried state. Dr. Marlowe's final words before vanishing were reportedly, his brain was listening. Still is. Authorities dismissed it as a scientist's breakdown. But weeks later, Marlowe's assistant disappeared as well. Last seen boarding a ferry to the Renmore ruins with a small lead case. That ferry was found capsized the next morning. No passengers, no case. But on the shore nearby, etched into the mud, was the Renmore symbol. The eye with branching roots, drawn with a stick that had been sharpened at both ends. This was no longer about Elias's past. This was about his echo, the ripple of something that had not ended in 1873, but had only just begun its transmission. And from here on, it wasn't just about Elias Renmore. It was about who else had started remembering what wasn't theirs to remember. In 1941, a covert committee was formed under the name Operation Veilmark. Officially, it was a psychological warfare task force working out of the War Office. Unofficially, it had one mission: to locate and suppress any remaining fragments of the Renmore case. What triggered this operation wasn't the journal or the tissue samples. It was an intercepted letter. A British codebreaker stationed in Bletchley Park was decoding communiques from Germany when he stumbled on a cipher buried within a mundane message. The code, once broken, spelled out only 4 words. Elias is not singular. That same week, 2 researchers in Berlin went missing. Their lab was sealed with wax, their notes burned. The only surviving file was a list of children, 21 in total, who had shown signs of precognitive drawing, mirror disassociation, and language inversion. The final page simply read, "Repeat anomalies match Renmore pattern." From that point on, a shadow network of operatives began seizing any case that echoed Elias's traits. Hospitals, orphanages, mental institutions across Europe and North America began losing records and, in some cases, entire wings. The children who matched Elias's neurological profile were either institutionalized in secret or never heard from again. And yet, scattered reports kept surfacing. In 1954, a girl in Montreal was recorded speaking perfect Akkadian, a language dead for 3,000 years, while tracing the Renmore symbol in condensation on her bedroom window. In 1962, a boy in Louisiana was found sleepwalking in the woods, repeatedly whispering, "I was borrowed, but it wants me back." Their DNA showed nothing unusual, but their dreams were identical. Each one drew the same place. A black corridor, endlessly tall, lined with archways that dripped like wax. And at the end, a doorway with no frame, just a rectangular hole in a wall of red stone. When researchers mapped the proportions of the room, they matched the sub-basement dimensions of Renmore House, a level that supposedly never existed, until ground-penetrating radar in 1967 revealed a sealed chamber 48 feet below the original foundations. Inside was nothing but a chair, carved from fused bone, and a word etched on the backrest. Isereth. No one sat in it. No one had to, because every child who drew that room had already been there. And according to Operation Veilmark, they didn't come back alone. The Isereth room, now the central fixation of Operation Veilmark, became a quarantine site under military control. Not even the Prime Minister was briefed. The entire excavation was labeled a geological stability survey, but beneath that lie, something was building. The chair, made from fused vertebrae and femurs, not all human, was sent for analysis. The conclusion? It couldn't be dated. Carbon testing failed. The bone density fluctuated under observation. One lab technician described the texture as pulsing like breath under frozen skin. He resigned the next day, checked himself into a private asylum, and never spoke again. But what truly terrified the team wasn't the chair. It was what lay directly beneath it. A narrow borehole, 13 inches in diameter, drilled perfectly into bedrock. No debris, no signs of ancient tools, just a smooth, vertical shaft, descending further than radar could read. The first probe, lowered into the shaft, was pulled back up melted. They tried again, with a fiber optic line. What they saw was footage the public never received, but according to a 1981 whistleblower, the camera passed 7 miles down before losing signal. But just before blackout, it captured a single frame. A face. Not human. Not animal. An arrangement of features designed to mimic familiarity, but wrong. Like a mask made by something that didn't quite understand what a face was supposed to look like. The expression? Neutral. As if waiting. One frame only. The operative who reviewed it clawed his own eyes out within 72 hours. He died humming a melody that was later matched to a medieval funerary chant associated with a heretical sect excommunicated in 1239. Then something happened above ground. Seismographs recorded low vibrations beneath Renmore, the kind found near volcanic activity, but there are no volcanoes in the region. Birds stopped flying over the manor entirely, and every researcher who stayed overnight reported the same nightmare. A boy, sitting in the bone chair, eyes rolled back, whispering in a voice that wasn't his. The final logbook entry from the excavation reads, "It is not a memory. It is a socket, and Elias was only the first plug." That night, the shaft was sealed with molten lead. The bone chair encased in resin and buried in an undisclosed location. But the dreams never stopped, and neither did the whispers that, in 1976, a classified report surfaced under the codename Project Hollow Seed. It detailed a disturbing pattern, one too precise to be ignored. Across 6 countries, over a span of just 11 months, 11 children went missing under eerily similar conditions. All from different cities, all aged between 8 and 10, all last seen in their sleep, with windows locked from the inside. No footprints, no signs of struggle. And in every single bedroom, investigators found one identical object left behind. A sheet of paper, blank, except for a drawing in red wax. Not pencil, not ink, red wax. Every sketch depicted the same image, a faceless figure cradling a child, standing in front of a massive door. But in each drawing, the number of hinges on the door increased. One sketch had 2. Another had 5. By the final case, the 12th, the door had 7 hinges and was slightly ajar. The implication was clear. Whatever this was, it was opening. Valemark agents were sent to collect the drawings. But during transport, the lead officer, Agent Rowe, burned all 12. When questioned, his only answer was, "It knows when you look too long." He was reassigned. Then he vanished. What came next was worse. In 1979, the sealed sub-basement beneath Renmore ruptured. Surveillance footage showed no explosion, no impact, just a moment of silence, followed by the lead seal cracking inward like something had sucked the pressure down. What emerged wasn't visible, but the air turned black. Not with smoke, but with shadows that didn't match any known angle of light. Technicians monitoring the seismic sensors went deaf. 7 of them permanently. 3 of them blind. One wrote on the wall in his own blood before collapsing. The door was never ours to lock. Renmore was evacuated. The surrounding acre of land was purchased by a shell corporation tied to Valemark, and then buried beneath layers of false geological maps and forestry records. The manor still stands, rotted, silent, but the sublevels were filled with concrete, then covered with a man-made lake. A tourist trail now runs nearby. Fishermen cast lines into waters they were never told were synthetic. And below that lake, the hole still waits. The chair is gone. The boy is gone. But the door? The door never closed. By 1982, former Valemark operatives began leaking fragments. Coded language, symbolic patterns, unexplainable art. These weren't just whistleblowers. They were people unraveling, bleeding memory into madness. Some spoke in tongues. Others drew the same figure obsessively. The boy with blackened eyes, seated upon a throne of bones, smiling with a mouth he didn't have. The most chilling artifact came from a former psychological analyst embedded in Project Hollow Seed. His leaked journal pages, known as the Renmore transcripts, describe a phenomenon he called the echo virus. Not a biological agent, a psychic one. According to his notes, the chair didn't just store memory. It fed it outward, projecting the psychic residue of whatever force once sat there. Elias Renmore, the boy, had not simply been affected. He had been used as a lens, as a transmission device. His presence was a conduit. The whispers? A signal. And here's where it fractures logic. He claimed the entity communicating through Elias had no name, no gender, and no location, because it didn't exist in space the way we understand it. It lived in the memory of space. A parasite buried in forgotten trauma, surfacing only where horror had thinned the boundaries. In other words, it didn't come through the boy. It came back with him. He wasn't possessed. He was a returning fragment. In 1984, one final attempt was made to recover the lost footage from the probe that descended the shaft beneath the chair. They succeeded in pulling a corrupted file, less than 3 seconds in length, but one clean frame was extracted and reviewed. It showed Elias Renmore again, only not as a child. He was fully grown, clad in black robes, same pale skin, same emotionless eyes, and behind him stood the door, all 7 hinges open, a hand of smoke reaching through. This was impossible. Elias had died in 1874. The frame was burned, every copy deleted. And yet, in 1991, a team hiking near the artificial lake at Renmore took a photo at sunset. There in the background, half in shadow, half in reflection, was Elias, Unaged, watching, smiling, waiting. By the late 1990s, a blacklisted division within Valemark, referred to internally as the Custodians, was tasked with a singular goal: erase Elias Renmore from global memory. Not for books, not for museums, for minds. Using a blend of neurolinguistic programming, subliminal symbol disruption, and coordinated obfuscation across historical records, they began systematically dismantling all known references to the Renmore lineage. Entire census records were redacted. Birth certificates vanished. Obituaries rewritten. Schools renamed. And for a while, it worked. Historians forgot. Psychologists dismissed the boy as a rural myth. Even former agents began to experience blank spots where memories of Renmore should have been. But there was one problem the custodians couldn't eliminate. The symbol. Elias had carved it into stone walls, burned it into barn doors, etched it into skin. A perfect, symmetrical spiral with 7 inward lines, coiling toward a center no one could follow without nausea, panic, or seizure. The symbol returned wherever they destroyed it. Graffiti on walls in Serbia, then Buenos Aires, then Detroit. Always the same. Same dimensions. Same location, on walls facing east. And near each one, a child went missing. 7 total. All born on the exact same date. October 3rd, 1991. The day the artificial lake at Renmore froze over, despite the surrounding temperature being 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Coincidence? One survivor thought not. In 1998, a girl named Lena Orvin was found wandering the Renmore woods barefoot, teeth shattered, eyes burned from the inside. She whispered a phrase repeatedly for 3 days before dying from complete nervous collapse. The phrase? He gave me the bone crown. This phrase surfaced in another location, an underground message board frequented by occult researchers. A user named C1V47 uploaded a single post before vanishing. It read, "He was never a boy. He was the memory of something older than time wearing a child's face. The chair was not for him. It was for us. To remember. To kneel. To return. When a spiral turns inward, the last door will open." Renmore wasn't the beginning. It was the third trumpet. That phrase, the third trumpet, appeared later in the margins of a 15th century grimoire unearthed in France. It described the return of a formless king through memory, not time. And it warned, he arrives through belief. So tell me, how many people believe in Elias now? How many doors did we just open, without meaning to? The year is 2004. A forgotten maintenance worker named Roland Finch unlocks a rusted gate on the southern shore of Lake Renmore. His task is routine, check sediment flow beneath the spillway. What he finds instead is a dry basin. No water, no runoff, just soil cracked like skin, and in the center, where the chair was once submerged, the symbol, etched 20 feet wide into the earth, still fresh, the spiral, the 7 lines, and at its center, embedded like a tumor, a tooth, human, child-sized, extracted, clean, unnaturally white, and humming. Finch disappears 3 days later. No trace, not even boot prints. His truck? Still running. His keys? Found half buried near the symbol, fused together, as though melted from inside. That same week, a classified Veilmark memo circulates among surviving personnel. It reads, "Project Hollowseed has breached Phase 5. Subject Renmore is now in cognitive orbit. Containment is no longer spatial. It is epistemic. Recommendation, mass dilution via folklore. Bury him in fiction. Scatter him through horror. Misdirect belief. Memory must not congeal." And suddenly, something happens in pop culture. Within months, low-budget horror films begin depicting pale children in chairs. Spiral symbols appear in comics, games, posters. Urban legends emerge. The boy in the lake. The bone crown prince. The whisper seat. People laugh. They think it's entertainment. But every fictional mention feeds the root. Because the symbol wasn't just a mark. It was a circuit, a mnemonic sigil that activates in repetition. The more it's repeated, even as fiction, the more it awakens. And someone, somewhere, was tracking this. A retired linguist from Poland named Irina Kolnick published a final theory before her death in 2006. Her paper, titled The Mnemonic Collapse Hypothesis, outlined a global pattern. Certain names could not be forgotten. No matter the suppression, the erasure, the ridicule, Elias Renmore kept returning. In whispers, in drawings, in sleep. Kolnick's conclusion? He is not an individual. He is the collapse point of memory itself. When too much trauma is buried, it grows roots. And the root becomes aware. She ended her work with one sentence. When he stands, we forget ourselves. And here's the final horror. Her paper was scrubbed within 24 hours. But the metadata remains. Date created? October 3rd. Time? 3:33 a.m. The spiral is still turning. And if you're still watching, it's already inside you. They said the Renmore case was closed. But that was a lie. Fabricated to contain what couldn't be destroyed. Because by 2009, reports began surfacing again. Not from government agencies or doctors, but from people like you. Viewers. Obscure bloggers. Paranormal YouTube channels buried in the algorithm. Each report different in surface, but identical in structure. They dreamed of a chair, a boy, a basement without walls, and a voice they couldn't remember hearing, but which left meaning behind like wet footprints. One woman, a schoolteacher from Kentucky, posted a 4-minute clip before her channel was banned. In the video, she holds up a piece of lined paper, trembling. It shows the spiral, drawn in charcoal, lines jagged and uneven, but unmistakable. She whispers, "I don't know why I drew this. My students did it first." Cut to silence. Then static. Then the faint sound of children laughing, underwater. Another report. Oslo, 2012. An underground performance artist sets up an exhibit called The Whisper Seat. Visitors sit alone in a dark room, in a replica of the Renmore chair, while faint audio loops in the background. Elias reciting something unintelligible in reverse. Only 2 words are clear, spoken in flawless Latin. Adveniat memoria. Memory will come. Every attendee reported one of 2 things afterward. No memory of the event at all. Vivid hallucinations of a field of bones, stretching beneath a bleeding sky. Then came a chain choir. In 2015, a group of teenagers exploring an abandoned asylum in Colorado recorded a disturbing audio track, faint, melodic humming coming from a locked chamber beneath the West Wing. They described it as children humming a song that hadn't been written yet. When they forced the door open, it was empty, except for a rusted chair, and a message carved into the wall behind it. "He sits where we forget." This was not the first time it had been reported. That phrase, that arrangement, it appears in 9 cultures. From ancient tomb etchings in China, to 17th century occult manuscripts in Prague, to a forgotten slave song recorded in Mississippi, 1861. He sits where we forget. He waits where we hide. And when we recall his name, that's when the real world dies. Elias was not the anomaly. He was the reminder. And the world has already started remembering. We tried to erase him, but erasure only made him louder. In 2017, the Vatican quietly acquired a painting long believed to be a lost Caravaggio. But X-ray scans revealed a second layer. Beneath the oil, another figure had been painted over. A boy, seated, back straight, eyes closed. The same expressionless posture seen in every confirmed image of Elias Renmore. But this painting dated to 1612, long before his birth, long before Briarhelm, long before anyone gave him a name. A Jesuit scholar, Father Matthias Ehrhardt, published one line before disappearing from public life. He has no birth date because he was never born. He was remembered. By 2020, a pattern emerged that no skeptic could explain. Every country that attempted to archive, digitize, or suppress the Renmore file, whether through AI, metadata encryption, or psychological reclassification, reported infrastructure failures. Databases corrupted. Hard drives overheated. Voice recognition software began returning gibberish when users searched for Elias. One system logged a chilling output. Query denied. The chair remains occupied. And in that same year, a disturbing trend appeared on children's art forums. Thousands of children across North America began uploading drawings of spirals. Some included chairs. Others included a boy with no mouth. None of them were taught this. One 7-year-old girl from Maine captioned hers. "He talks inside. No one else hears him. He says he's sorry." Her parents found her sitting silently in the closet 2 nights later, eyes shut, back straight. When asked what she was doing, she replied, "Waiting for the others to forget." Her case was one of 73 in that year alone. Each child described the same figure. Thin, pale, seated in darkness. When asked what his name was, none of them remembered. But every single one, without fail, drew the same spiral. And here's the most chilling piece. A linguist reviewing these cases discovered that in multiple dialects, Basque, Albanian, Sumerian, the word for spiral, when phonetically reversed, forms a near anagram of Renmore. Not a name, a function, not a child, a convergence. Every time we attempt to forget Elias, the pattern tightens. And now you've heard it too. The spiral has entered your memory. It may fade by morning, but one day you'll dream of a chair, and you won't remember why you fear it. Now listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you has been forbidden, hidden behind sealed reports, encrypted files, and deliberately mangled folklore. It's the secret that connected Briarhelm to dozens of unexplained events worldwide. It's called the residual doctrine. Classified by early British parapsychologists in the 1890s, the doctrine was never formally published. Only fragments were recovered, most burned in a fire at Ravenshade Library in 1901. But the pieces that survive speak of a phenomenon they labeled cognitive root looping. It refers to entities or phenomena that cannot be remembered without consequence. The more they are spoken of, the more they anchor themselves in reality. And Elias Renmore? He wasn't just part of this doctrine. He was its proof. One recovered note, written by occult researcher Alastair Morn, states, "It is not the boy that is unnatural. It is the world's reaction to remembering him." You see, Elias didn't violate the laws of biology. He violated the rules of memory. Witnesses never forgot him. They forgot around him. Like bending light around a black hole, memory folds itself, attempting to avoid exposure. And the more people who speak his name, the harder the world fights to rewrite itself. That's why the files vanished. That's why the parents don't match. That's why no one can tell you what day he actually died. Because every time someone gets close, they lose part of themselves in return. And the horror isn't that Elias survived. The horror is that he doesn't need to. The spiral, the chair, the humming, these are not remnants. They are assumptions. They occur when enough people remember in sync. In 2023, a dark web collective posted a chilling claim. If 333 people think of the spiral while seated in silence for 7 minutes, something appears. A figure. Small. Silent. Still. But when any of them are asked what happened afterward, they give only one answer. There was no boy. Just an empty chair. And it wasn't us who sat in it. Are you beginning to understand? Elias isn't a myth. He is a reflex. A global, cross-generational memory tick. Something humanity accidentally created and now fights daily to forget. But you're still here. Still watching. So now you must answer this. Would you sit in a chair just to see what remembers you back? By now, you've heard the spiral. You've felt the gravity of Elias Renmore. Not as a story, not as a superstition, but as a presence that refuses to be untangled. And maybe you think you're safe. That all of this is confined to some distant manor in Briarhelm or lost in crumbling records. You're wrong. Because in 2024, a neurologist named Dr. Jeanette Kalhoff conducted a blind study at the University of Ghent. Her aim was to analyze recurring dream patterns in patients with no previous psychiatric history. Among 412 subjects across 5 countries, one phrase appeared in nearly every dream log. The boy is already here. No context. No prompting. Different cultures. Different languages. Same message. But it gets worse. Dr. Kalhoff didn't know that her study was tapping into an old frequency. One archived but never erased. A dormant signal, once broadcast on shortwave radios in the 1960s, only during blackouts. Untraceable. Unlabeled. Known only as Station E7. Silent chair. Survivors who remember hearing it describe a low hum, then faint breathing, then silence, and then a child's voice, repeating coordinates. Those coordinates? They all point to abandoned orphanages. Every single one, from Belarus to Brazil. And in every site investigated, the same eerie discovery. One child-sized chair, placed perfectly at the center of the room, upright, unmoved, and the floor beneath? Worn smooth in a spiral pattern. No explanation. No historical record. But always the same setup. In 2025, a data analyst working for a major tech company reported an anomaly. Facial recognition AI, during a sweep of public livestream footage, began tagging unidentified child seated in thousands of clips where no child was visible. He thought it was a glitch, until he paused one stream frame by frame. And for exactly one frame, the child was there. Pale, thin, mouth closed, seated in the back of a subway train. When reversed, the file name auto-generated by the software read, "They see you when you forget." DeadScroll viewers, this is where you come in. If you're still here, type in the comments. The chair remains occupied. Do it now. Twice. Because the spiral only tightens when it's seen. And someone or something is waiting at the center. Watching. Listening. Ready to return. Why now? It's no longer a question of belief. It's a matter of what has already begun. What if Elias Renmore was never just a child? What if he was a pattern, born into the world like a virus, designed not to be studied, but to spread through memory, through fear, through silence? In 1896, one of the final journal entries of Reverend Thomas Marrow, the last recorded spiritual investigator assigned to the Briarhelm region, reads, "The boy does not exist, but his influence is older than our records. He is not in the house. He is the house." That's the real horror, isn't it? That Elias isn't a boy, or a ghost, or a curse. He's a location of thought, a kind of living idea that moves between us like a rumor, invisible, shape-shifting, consuming the memory of anyone who tries to speak too clearly or look too long. And now, this location has started moving. Because in April of this year, a group of thrill seekers on a live stream explored the abandoned Renmore estate. Nothing remarkable, until one of them sat in the old parlor chair as a joke. The moment he did, the screen flickered. The stream cut to static. When it returned, his seat was empty. But he never stood up. He didn't fall. He didn't scream. He was just gone. And here's what's worse. The footage replayed later showed no interruption. No flicker. No cut. Just the boy seated, then the chair alone. His friends? They don't remember he ever came with them. Viewers? They swear they saw 5 people, not 4. But the uploaded stream only shows 4 names. The chair remains untouched. This isn't isolated anymore. This isn't just Briarhelm. Elias is migrating. Through videos. Through retellings. Through you. Even your memory of this video might begin to change. You may remember a detail that wasn't here. A voice that wasn't yours whispering. He is not missing. He's waiting to be remembered. You don't think the spiral has reached you? Try something tonight. Sit alone, close your eyes, and listen for the hum. Because if you hear it just once, that means he's already in your house. Let's go back one final time. To Briarhelm. To 1873. To the cold, creaking corridors of Elias Renmore's home. And to the final official note logged before the manor was shuttered and sealed forever. It wasn't a police report. It wasn't written by a doctor or investigator. It was scrawled in ink, trembling and uneven, by a housemaid named Clara Hale. She had served the Renmore household since before Elias's birth, and she was the only staff member to survive the final night intact. Her journal was recovered under the floorboards in 1910 during reconstruction of the East Wing. Here's what it said. It's not the boy. It never was. It's the thing he let in. The thing that lives in the walls when the rooms go quiet. The one that teaches him how to smile without moving. The one that sits beneath his bed and calls to him in Latin. The one that changes the clocks. She goes on. There are 2 chairs in the dining room now, but only one child. The second chair is never cold. There's no signature, no date, but the final line, burned into the last page as if pressed with hot iron. Tell no one the pattern. Tell no one the shape. Now here's where the official history turns deliberately silent. Between 1873 and 1880, no official British census lists the Renmore Manor or its residents. It's as if the house vanished off the map, before reappearing in 1881, listed simply as vacant, warning, structure unfit. But locals continued to report seeing a light in the attic, a flickering shape in the window. And once, in 1891, a constable passing by on horseback claimed he heard a music box playing behind the shutters, one that repeated the same 5-note melody on loop. He knocked on the door. No answer. So he left. A week later, That constable's wife filed a missing persons report. He had gone upstairs to put their son to bed. 15 minutes passed. When she checked the room, both beds were made, both windows open. No sign of either of them. But one thing was there on the floor. A perfect spiral drawn in candle soot. DeadScroll viewers, if you're still watching, you need to remember this shape. Not to understand it, not to decode it, but to survive it. Here's the part most versions never include, because by now, the line between legend and reality has all but collapsed. But this section isn't legend. This was filed, recorded, and sealed, and uncovered only after the death of a former archivist from the Historical Anomalies Division of the Crown Office. A folder marked EW for internal use only. Inside, 6 black and white photographs, none labeled, each more chilling than the last. Photo 1. A group of 6 children standing outside Briarhelm Church, all dressed in morning black. But look closer. Every face is identical. The same boy, repeated. Photo 2. A cracked mirror in the Renmore attic, etched into the frame with childlike precision. I am what comes through when you pray too loudly. Photo 3. A nurse from Hollowcroft Asylum, where Elias was allegedly held after the fire. But her eyes are burned out in the print. Literally, as if someone pressed a cigarette into the photo. Photo 4. A spiral carved into the floor of the manor, far more detailed than anything seen before. This one includes letters. Not in Latin, not in Greek, a language that no known expert could identify. Photo 5. A group of men in suits, mid-meeting, 5 of them staring dead into the camera. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows, a boy, standing, smiling, his eyes covered in gauze. Photo 6. Empty, but labeled on the back. This was taken inside your home. August 3rd. That was today's date. That was your home. No explanation. No context. Just that. Now think. Why did the file include you? How long has the Renmore pattern been spreading through stories? Through videos? Through images you can't unsee? You think closing this tab will save you? You think silence keeps him out? No. Elias doesn't want your fear. He wants your attention. That's how he grows. That's how the spiral tightens. That's how the boy's science couldn't explain becomes the truth no one can deny. What happened to Elias Renmore? The official records end in 1873, but the stories, whispers passed from parent to child, from locals to out-of-towners, didn't end. They evolved. In 1901, a Briarhelm physician named Dr. Lennox claimed to treat a boy whose skin reacted violently to light prayers. The child had no birth certificate, no guardian, and he only responded when spoken to in reverse speech. In 1926, a traveling priest stopped in Briarhelm to investigate rumors of a changeling boy living in the hills. His journal ends mid-sentence. He's not a boy. He's a vessel. He is the shell for something older than hope. I heard it laugh when... No more entries. Then in 1959, a fire consumed the east wing of Hollowcroft Asylum. All patients were evacuated, except one. The attending nurse said, and this was written into the report, he refused to leave, said the fire couldn't touch him, that he remembered the last time. She described his voice as too steady for a child, and his stare as memorized. The boy's name? Not listed, but someone penciled 2 initials into the corner of the report. EW. Now here's the darkest part. Every 40 years since 1873, something happens in Briarhelm, and it always starts the same way. A child vanishes. A music box is heard. A spiral is found burned into a floor. And now, this is 2025. Some claim the spiral is a map, not a symbol. A path to something buried. Or worse, something waking. It doesn't matter if you believe. It doesn't matter if you dismiss this as folklore or fiction, because belief was never the entry point. It's attention, and now that you've seen it, he knows where you are. If you're still with us, comment below. The mirror remembers what the fire forgot. Type it twice. Once for you, once for the one watching through you. And if you're brave enough to finish this story, the final piece is waiting. Let's go to the last room in the house. The room no one was ever supposed to open. It was never locked. It was simply ignored, hidden in plain sight. The one place in Briarhelm Manor that investigators, historians, and even trespassers refused to enter. They called it the still room. No wind, no echoes, not even the tick of time dared enter. The door was plain, unmarked, but behind it, every answer the world had tried to bury. Inside, they found a crib, a spiral etched into its base, more intricate than any before. Above the crib, an oil painting of a boy, arms folded, eyes closed. Underneath, the inscription, Elias Renmore, born unnamed, dies unending. And on the walls, hundreds of handwritten notes, scrawled by different hands, different centuries, all repeating the same message. He's not gone. He's becoming. The final journal entry left by the last caretaker of Briarhelm reads, "It was never about science. It was about surrender. You don't explain Elias. You submit to him. Every story told about him is a doorway. Every whisper, an invitation. The spiral is not a mark of possession. It's a contract. And now, DeadScroll family, here's what we've learned. Elias Renmore was never a boy. He was a reaction, a consequence, born of too many unanswered prayers, too many secrets buried under manners and myths. He doesn't need a body. He only needs a name. And now, you know it. You've heard the spiral's pull. You've stepped into the still room. So ask yourself, was this just a story? Or was this the moment you started hearing the music box too? If you've made it this far, like this video, subscribe to DeadScroll, because stories like this, they don't want to be told. And one day, when the spiral finds your floor, when the room goes quiet, just remember this. Some mysteries were never meant to be solved. They were meant to be obeyed.